Welcome to another in our series of Kehillat Israel podcasts. This is a recording of Rabbi Amy Bernstein's weekly Friday morning Torah study.
This week's Parashat Achare Mot and into Kedoshim, which is next week's Parsha, they're often read together. Remember, we have 4 added Shabbatot whenever we add the leap month of the second Adar. We add a second Adar every so often so that Passover doesn't wind up in the summer. So to rectify the lunar calendar, we add an Adar Bet, an Adar 2 to the calendar. I was born in Adar Bet, which means I'm really only 17, right? Which is lovely to know. Life affirming. So we split out these parshiot, we double up so that when we add Adar Bet, we have parshiot to read, so that we have, because we have 4 extra Shabbats to deal with in terms of a reading. So generally these are doubled up, Achare Mot and Kedoshim. So this is kind of the core of the Levitical worldview in some ways. It's very expressive of the Levitical worldview. It is a text that is very difficult for us as Western modern readers to deal with. And it is the one that people love to turn to, right? Who want to, I just watched this wonderful comedian, Samantha Bee. I've never seen her before. Rabbi Nick sent me a thing she did on Ted Cruz. Which was hilarious. So, but the part of it, one shot was him coming up to the podium to speak after someone who had been speaking was introducing him. And the person who was speaking before him was quoting our Parsha, saying, and those who lie with another man, they deserve to be killed. They deserve death. Not my words, his. Not my words, his. They deserve death. Then Ted Cruz is invited up to speak. So it's like, but anyway, the point being people love, right, who have an agenda to point to this text, while ignoring the rest of the book of Leviticus, the rest of the laws in Deuteronomy, the rest of the laws in right? So it's very selective. It doesn't mean this text is unproblematic. Fortunately, we're not fundamentalists. And so fortunately, we can appreciate Leviticus in its own time for what it was about. So what I'd like to do with you today is do a little bit of that. So rather than focusing on necessarily just the issue of homosexuality and why it's addressed the way it is, I'll touch on that. But I'd like to kind of get at with you. So I've given you a larger packet this morning than I generally give you because I want you to keep it. So I'm going to give you this material like I always do, but it's a little more terse, right? It's a little more dense. It's a little longer in terms of the actual text, because I want you to hang on to it. Because next time somebody wants to pull out something from the Bible, I don't care where in the Bible it is. When they want to yank something out of the Bible and hurl it at somebody else or a group of people, I want you to pull this out and send it to them. Because it is a collection of 2 sources, both of which I respect greatly, but it treats Leviticus in its own context, in its own time, and is a wonderful scholarly approach, to dealing with this. For those of us who can't deal with it when it's in real life, I don't deal with this very well when it comes at me in real life, right? I start frothing at the mouth and it's not pretty. I have a very hard time staying calm and staying out of my emotions when people want to throw the Bible at me, right? Because I'm like, oh, really? Really? Okay, let's talk. Let's talk, Torah. Let's do that, right? So it's very hard. This is a very kind of wonderful way to have somebody reasonably explain some of what's going on here. All right, so what is going on here? We're looking at a book written by who? Who wrote Leviticus?
The priest.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, I was scared for a minute there. So it's written by the priests. This is the priestly manual, right? So Leviticus is not super concerned with the people. I mean, it's concerned with the people, but it's super concerned with the priests. And it comes from a worldview of the priests. It comes from what they're worried about. It comes from how they understand the universe to be constructed and put together. It comes from their priorities. Tell me something that you know about the priestly worldview and their priorities. What do we know? Because this is emblematic of the priesthood and their concerns. What are their concerns? What's their worldview? What's going on for the priests? Purity. Okay, so purity, sanctity. So those kind of could go together, right?
Relationship with God.
So relationship to or with God.
Their survival.
Aha. Their job security.
Formal procedures.
Procedure. Absolutely. Aha. Thank you. Thank you. Very important. Control. Of
Of the community. Patrilineage.
patrilineage. Who's your father?
We can trace
Whose
them back
clan
to
do you
that.
belong to?
We can trace them back. They have been traced back genetically. Kohanim today have genes that are similar to.
So why are they? Why is patrilineage their concern?
Because that's how we inherit.
So because that's who serves.
Right.
That's who's entitled to the title priest is someone who directly descends from a priest.
Exclusivity maybe goes with that.
All right, so exclusivity to us that means something that I don't think you mean. So what's another way to say what that's about?
Separation.
The union.
The tribal membership in a particular group.
Meaning the Levitical tribe.
Well, meaning the priestly tribe. Yeah.
Priests are not a tribe,
Well, okay.
right? So the Levitical tribe, so that because what this tends to mean for us is I'm in, you're out.
Yeah.
And so I exclude everybody else. This is not how ancient Israel understood the priests only coming from the clan of Levi. Right? It was that they were the ones on the hook. God picked them to be on the hook for the rest of the Israelites. So yes, it's exclusive, but we tend to think of that as a privilege for them.
Right.
It's a privilege, but it's a huge risk, right? It's not, they didn't get to choose. Right.
They're
It is
responsible
membership in
for
a
the
small
actions of people outside their.
That's right. So with exclusivity comes, right, that they bear the responsibility.
But they also have control. They also end up having.
Is there a difference between a clan and a tribe?
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Yes. Clan is an extended family unit.
Okay.
Tribe is bigger than clan. We can all belong to the tribe of Judah. You don't belong to my clan. Several clans belong. Correct.
I mean, I think they're also concerned with their leads back to the relationship with God, but, like their interpretation of what they're supposed to do and what God wants them to do.
So the procedures that are involved in maintaining a relationship to God. All right. This is the meta. So let's put blue by all the meta stuff, right? So relationship to God, right? I guess you could say job security, maybe in some respect control and procedure. The way that those meta issues get expressed are in then the details of things like purity and sanctity. That's the way they work out having the relationship with God stay copacetic. Right? Procedures involve sacrifice, involve incense, involve lighting the menorah, right? So so you have the meta issues, but when you get down to how do we do all of that, it becomes about purity and sanctity, and here's a big one. A very big one is separation. Why? What is separation about? We know this. Why is separation so important? What does it have to do with the ancient worldview? The ancient Israelite worldview?
That some are dirty and some are clean.
So that's one category of what needs to be separated. Why separation?
I think it I just think it keeps them together as a tribe. And
I'm talking about separation in general as a concept. Why is separating things so important?
Because when something is bad, it's contained.
So yes, but where does this originate? Separation.
Because they were fearful if there was mixing, they were very fearful.
Thank you. Thank you. Creation. They didn't make it up. They did not make up separation being the key. That is the worldview they inherit. How is the world created?
Separating light from dark.
Separating light from dark. Separating land from water. Separating the upper waters from the lower waters. Because the ancient cosmology it is all chaos.
So you're talking about order.
For them, order equals creation.
Oh, wow.
Do you get it? This is critical to understand this text. If you don't understand that, you do not understand what's written here. They believe that the entire universe stands because there is separation. There is individuation. There is categorization. And if those categories start to bleed into one another, you have the beginnings of the undoing of creation. You have the possibility of existential chaos returning. And every little bit of things that should be separated coming together contaminates the land, contaminates everything, and leads to the possibility of the chaos of war, of exile. And that is how they understand, by the way, the exile. That's how they understand losing the battle and being exiled. We did stuff that caused enough contamination that the earth spat them out. Israel spat them out. That is the worldview that we're working with.
So is that why rabbinic writings become sort of progressively more separating throughout? I mean, if you look at how much separation is there at the end of the first 6 days, it's, light versus dark and water versus land and things like, there's not, I mean, yes, things have been separated, but like not to the extent of this causes something, now you have to bring an unblemished calf in order to do a sacrifice in order to get yourself back. And that keeps on going on and on and on. So you have this hyper activity to keep on. Once you've started separating, you can't stop separating. You have to keep on separating all the time.
Nice. So things continue to go along from creation, except they devolve. And so what fixes that devolution? Procedures. Procedures. Right now, because what happened? What is the Noah story? The Noah story is it got so bad that chaos reigned. And what happens when chaos reigns? Everything is obliterated. The waters from above, what did God do? God allowed the waters from above and the waters from below to meet. To return to not primordial, but to return to a certain kind of watery chaos, right? Because remember, water existed in our text before anything. Water already exists. Remember? Breshit, and the Spirit of God hovered over the face of Tehom, of the deep. The deep is already there. So there seems to be some consciousness about water is like before creation, right? So when you return it to this watery mess, that's what happens when human beings corrupt everything. So after that, now we have procedures. Now you can kill animals, but it has to be mitigated by procedures. And once they become a people living in their own land, now there's major procedures. unblemished, blah, blah, blah. So what Richard is pointing to is, after the destruction of the temple and the priesthood goes away, we still see in the writings of the rabbis, the only way they now can continue this idea of separation and order is to make everything a taxonomy. Everything. Because they can't do anything anymore. They can't mitigate the relationship with God anymore based on tahara, on purity and impurity. They're powerless. They're impotent. Now, how many of them would like to go back? They say all the time they want to go back. Really? Right? They like their jobs. Right? They don't want to hand over their authority to the priest. But the instinct to separate and categorize and keep everything ordered continues, and in some ways intensifies once they don't have any power. Right? To actually do that stuff.
Well, it legitimizes them.
It legitimizes them.
They claim to be direct descendants of the priest.
So kashrut expands immensely, doesn't it? Right? The ideas of kashrut. Now we have to have 2 sets of silverware. That's the rabbis taking this stuff to the nth degree, right? It's an existential OCD. That is our people's shtick.
And not just our people, when you say taxonomy, and immediately, of course, every single living creature has to have its species, its Latin name, its this name. We can't stop ordering things.
Because it is a human tendency. Other folks, however, like I look at certain Eastern traditions where these monks spend how long making this sand mandala? Like, a year. Like with every grain of sand like this, hunched over, causing arthritis, hunched over all day, every day. And what do they do when it's finished? They wipe it clean. And they start over. So, because it's a very ingrained teaching in that culture that we should not be attached to things that are temporal, that we need to step back from our desire to order and control everything. It's not Jewish. I'm not saying it's good or bad. It's not Jewish. We're like, don't even step near the mandala. Oh my God, you almost breathed on it. You know how long I worked on that, right? So it's not Jewish.
It reminds me of the spider, trying to build a spider web because the people before it, the spiders before it, they have the exact same web as the other one before it, and then, a fly goes in it or something and sort of messes it up.
And they start over.
Purpose, and then they start over again too. And I think that there's also, I think about like my dad, and every day thinking about like everything he does for his parents. Like it's a way to keep back to that place or the ancient and with sort of no regard for the present and the future and what's going on and but you sort of see the yin and the yang of it all.
Right. So there's things about it that are fear-based, that are kind of take you out of the moment, and there's things about it that make sense, that kind of go, okay, I feel better. Like now I know what species and what genus, and it's all, it's like, okay, I feel better. Like, so, people who go into science, the people who name those bugs based on a different shape antenna, like, they love that, right? So I think there are personalities that are drawn, right, to that, and those of us are kind of like, whatever, it's a bug. But let's talk about, what do bugs mean? And what do bugs mean?
What do the bugs mean?
Right. All right. So that is what we're coming out of and then if you take something chaotic, like, what is one of the most chaotic things we can possibly imagine dealing with when we're dealing with human beings? Sex. Exactly right. So you take sexuality, you take attraction, I know,
No, it's we're sitting right under it.
But would you just pump it up like 1 or 2? It's a little cold.
It's a little chaotic in here.
It's a little chaotic in terms of temperature. Yes, Miriam, it is. Sexuality, erotic, anything, energy that's erotic, is by definition chaotic because we don't choose it. Right? Like, we don't choose where we're attracted. We don't choose where we're drawn. We can choose what we do. I want to be very clear. I'm not saying we can't control it, but Eroticism is by definition chaotic. We don't even generate it, right? It just kind of happens. We can encourage it. We can create conditions that would allow for it. This is why no dancing, right? So, it leads to dancing, right? I love that joke.
Men are separated from women.
Of course. So because you don't want to create the conditions for attraction to be encouraged and worse, to distract you from what you're supposed to be doing because it's there. Why do you think we have a mechitza? We don't have a mechitza because we're puritanical. We have a mechitza because we know everybody's looking over the mechitza. Everybody's feeling it. Everybody's attracted. Everybody. So, well, the men more than the women, I gotta be honest. But the mechitza's for the men. Just to be clear, I was taught this in yeshiva, folks. I'm not making this up. So the mechitza's for the men, because they're always attracted, all the time. And it's this terrifying force. Right? That's what Lilith is about. If you have an erotic dream as a man, you gotta blame somebody, right? Lilith did it. Lilith came and oh my God. So, because it's scary to not have control over what we feel.
To be distracted.
To be distracted is
from whatever
you've committed to is upsetting, like on some levels if you're deeply committed. So sexuality is a huge issue all over the ancient world. It's still a huge issue in traditional societies. We've talked a lot about this, about women's sexuality belongs to men. We've talked about this. I think it's still a huge issue in our culture. We've just gone and flipped the whole thing over, and now it's just sexuality everywhere all the time, and we sexualize little girls with what they wear, and it's horrifying. So, there's kind of repressing it and dealing with it by trying to control it and minimize it and squash it. And there's dealing with it the way we do in our culture, which is it's just everywhere. It's in everything. You want to sell a car, put, somebody in a bikini on the front of the car, who's rail thin and very white. Okay. So we're going to look at Leviticus, and we're going to look at it within this context, and you can see, we're just going to read through without discussing right now. We're just going to read through so you can start to hear what's really going on in terms of order, control. Obviously some way terrifying discomfort with the way the world kind of actually works. All right, so 17:1. Who's prepared to read?
The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to Aaron and his sons and to all the Israelite people and say to them, this is what the Lord has commanded. If anyone of the house of Israel slaughters an ox or sheep or goat in the camp, or does so outside the camp, and does not bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting to present it as an offering to the Lord before the Lord's tabernacle, blood guilt shall be imputed to that man. He has shed blood. That man shall be cut off from among his people. This is in order that the Israelites may bring the sacrifices which they have been making in the open, that they may bring them before the Lord to the priest at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and offer them as sacrifices of well-being to the Lord. That the priest may dash the blood against the altar of the Lord at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and turn the fat into smoke as a pleasing odor to the Lord, and that they may offer their sacrifices no more to the goat demons after whom they stray. This shall be to them a law for all time throughout the ages."
Go on.
Say to them further, if any one of the house of Israel or of the strangers who reside among them offers a burnt offering or a sacrifice, and does not bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting to offer to the Lord, that person shall be cut off from his people.
Go on.
And if any one of the house of Israel or of the strangers who reside among them partakes of any blood, I will set my face against the person who partakes of the blood, and I will cut him off from among his kin. For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have assigned it to you for making expiation for your lives upon the altar. It is the blood as life that effects expiation. Therefore I say to the Israelite people, no person among you shall partake of blood, nor shall the stranger who resides among you partake of blood.
All right. So then comes an Israelite or any stranger, right? Hunting, right? Needs to pour out the blood, right? And any person, citizen, or stranger who eats what has died or has been torn by wild beasts, right, shall bathe in water and remain unclean, because that's not good, right? So something that has been torn is something that is treifa, torn. Hence the word treif. We don't eat what's torn. We shecht it. So talk to me about, we've just had this long, whole, huge introduction to this. What's this dealing with? Okay, so what's it dealing with? Beyond procedure, what's it dealing with? Okay. Tell me more.
Life and death.
Life and death. Life and death. So if there are forces in this universe that are at work always to kind of pull things off the rails, what is the thing the priestly world is concerned about with this particular hunk of Torah? What's the urge? What's going on that they're trying to mitigate? Murder. Taking life. Killing. We all kill. And we do it constantly. Anyone who eats chicken, okay, Pam's excused. Anybody who eats chicken or meat, right, or fish, we kill. We kill constantly. The priestly world is concerned. The biblical worldview is very concerned with our license to kill. So what is I hope you took a packet, everybody. Yes, you got a packet?
2 pages.
Yes.
2 pages?
I think, yeah. All right, so this is an intro into Dr. Tikva Freimer-Kensky of blessed memory, my biblical year teacher, who, this is from her book, In the Wake of the Goddesses. She is dealing with early Israelite culture and religion emerging from pagan Canaanite religion. We're clear that that's what happened, yes? Okay. Israelite religion emerging from Canaanite polytheistic paganism. That's what she's interested in. She spoke she translated fluently Akkadian and Ugaritic texts and Sumerian. So she knew the parent languages of Hebrew. So when she looks at a Hebrew word, what she knows is, here's what that meant to the Sumerians. Here's what that meant in the neighborhood 4,000 years before Israelite emerges on the scene. She knows, so when she writes, there's an authority for me that she writes with, that even sometimes if she's over the top, I know she's grounded, right, in the language and concepts and worldview of the ancient Near East. Okay. So go to page 195. Everybody good? I don't want to lose anybody here. 195. So we're going to go to something Richard was talking about. We're going to go to the sentence that begins, once humans took the first steps towards culture.
Where's that?
It's about 12 lines.
Okay?
Yeah, got it.
Once humans took the first steps towards culture. She's talking now about the Israelite worldview. She's talking about Genesis. She's talking about ancient Israelite mythology, right? Once humans, in our story, took the first step towards cultures, they became less animal-like. And God acknowledges this difference by providing them with clothing made of animal skins. Why is she pointing that out? The hierarchical boundary. This is a hierarchy now. God takes, presumably, an animal and kills it and gives Adam and Eve their skin as clothing. This is a demarcation between humanity and the animal kingdom, saying humanity now is a higher ranking being than the animals. Right? And is even more explicit after the flood. Like we talked about, that it progresses. Humans could kill animals for food after the flood without eating the blood, right? Sparing the blood. Whereas no animal could kill a human without forfeiting its own life. The boundary between human and animal is uncrossable and part of the very definition of human being. However, in experiential reality, this uncrossable boundary of human existence could be crossed by mating with animals. So this is going to take us to the next part of our parsha, right? So one way we can cross the boundary between human and animal is to act like animals and kill something and eat it with its blood and just kind of indiscriminately kill something and consume it. That's what animals do. If we're really trying to make sure there's a separation, that's one of those boundaries. So now, everything that you're going to eat, we just read it, anything meat like, anything that was alive that you're going to eat has to be brought to the sanctuary. There must be another level of understanding and participation in expressing and giving of that to both God, the source of life, and the priesthood. There has to be an understanding beyond just tearing into something and eating it. Do you see how that's... Now that if you're going to kill something to eat it, there has to be procedure around it. That's how we maintain our humanity. That there should be something attached to taking a life. It isn't something we just do. We don't just pick up something from the floor and chew into it. It becomes a sanctified act that involves God and involves community and involves ritual, so that there is a serious understanding of what we've done when we take an animal's life to eat it.
And that's why Jewish women have cooked meat until it looks like shoe leather.
100%.
And it never
100%.
a drop of blood.
God forbid. God forbid.
I grew up and never had a steak properly
Cooked. Right?
until I was about
Well, my mother would put a lot of salt on the raw meat on a wooden drain board and get all the blood out of it. At 9 years old, I watched this. At 93, I'm learning why.
Right? Wonderful, Reuben. That
Giving it to, the gods and the priests and all of that is keeping the priesthood eating, like they're getting out of it too. It's like tithing, right? In a sense that.
sure, because they don't get flocks.
Right.
They don't get land.
Right.
Their portion is service.
Right.
So they have to be fed.
Right.
You can't have a priesthood with no way to make a living.
Right.
They're busy serving the Israelites.
Right.
So the Israelites feed the priests.
Right.
You pay the rabbi's salary.
Right.
Because the rabbi doesn't have time to make a living, God knows, outside of serving the Jewish people. So the community says, okay, we get it. We're going to take part of what we earn and support the people who are our religious leaders, because they've given their life to service, and they don't have a choice. The priests didn't have a choice.
Right.
We have a choice.
I know as far as my husband, I never understood that. He would see a spider in the house, he would put a piece of paper and bring it outside. Or I said, the only thing he killed was flies. But everything else, he would actually gently bring it outside.
And so Jewish tradition and the biblical worldview would consider that a good thing. That we should have regard for life.
Buddhists would do that too.
Right. That all
Compassion for all living things.
all traditions that want to cultivate our humanity cultivate a sense of, I shouldn't just indiscriminately kill what I can. Right? That's what animals do, and I'm not judging them. That's who they are. That's what they're supposed to do. Nobody's judging that. But is that what we want to be? Torah would say absolutely 100% not. Just intellectually and spiritually and whatever, of course not. But also because things start to right when you start to cross those boundaries, it gets really, really, really scary.
But don't animals just kill to eat for their own survival?
Yes.
If you think talk
No,
about
they kill for pleasure.
yours does, but everybody else.
All right. That's hilarious. All right. So now let's go to 18. So did you remember what Tikva just said? Okay. So yes.
Is it fair to say that a lot of these injunctions were written in response to the Canaanite culture as it existed at that time?
So some of it definitely is about one of the ways that you're going to make sure you are Israelite and you identify as Israelite, because that's another separation that's really important, because they don't want any backsliding. Right? No backsliding into Canaanite pagan, which of course was where they came from. That was familiar to them, right? So how do you prevent that? You're going to make sure you strengthen Israelite identity. And you're going to separate from those people. And so one of the ways you do that, right, is to say you're not going to eat what they eat. And you're not going to do what they do anymore. Some of it just gets reconstructed. Offerings are universal, right? Israelites reconstruct offering. But Canaanites make offerings and sacrifices. So, there's some things that get reconstructed. There's some things that it's like, you can't do that anymore, because that's what they do, right? No evergreens in the living room in the wintertime. You can't do that anymore, right? Okay. All right, so 18. Verse 1.
The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, I, the Lord, am your God. You shall not copy the practices of the land of Egypt where you dwelt, or of the land of Canaan to which I am taking you, nor shall you observe their laws. My rules alone shall you observe, and faithfully follow my laws. I am the Lord your God. You shall keep my laws and my rules, by the pursuit of which man shall live. I am the Lord. None of you shall come near anyone of his own flesh to uncover nakedness. I am the Lord. Your father's nakedness, that is, the nakedness of your mother, you shall not uncover. She is your mother, you shall not uncover her nakedness. Do not uncover the nakedness of your father's wife. It is the nakedness of your father. The nakedness of your sister, your father's daughter, or your mother's, whether born into the household or outside, do not uncover their nakedness. The nakedness of your son's daughter or of your daughter's daughter, do not uncover their nakedness, for their nakedness is yours. The nakedness of your father's wife's daughter, who has been born into your father's household, she is your sister, do not uncover her nakedness. Do not uncover the nakedness of your father's sister, she is your father's flesh. Do not uncover the nakedness of your mother's sister, for she is your mother's flesh. Do not uncover the nakedness of your father's brother. Do not approach his wife. She is your aunt. Do not uncover the nakedness of your daughter-in-law. She is your son's wife. You shall not uncover her nakedness. Do not uncover the nakedness of your brother's wife. It is the nakedness of your brother. Do not uncover the nakedness of a woman and her daughter, nor shall you marry her son's daughter or her daughter's daughter and uncover her nakedness. They are kindred. It is depravity. Do not marry a woman as a rival to her sister and uncover her nakedness in the other's lifetime. Do not come near a woman during her period of impurity to uncover her nakedness. Do not have carnal relations with your neighbor's wife and defile yourself with her. Do not allow any of your offspring to be offered up to Molech, and do not profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. Do not lie with a male as one lies with a woman. It is an abhorrence. Do not have carnal relations with any beast and defile yourself thereby, and let no woman lend herself to a beast to mate with it. It is perversion. Do not defile yourself in any of those ways, for it is by such that the nations that I am casting out before you defiled themselves. Thus the land became defiled, and I called it to account for its iniquity, and the land spewed out its inhabitants. But you must keep my laws and my rules, and you must not do any of those abhorrent things, neither the citizen nor the stranger who resides among you, for all those abhorrent things were done by the people who were in the land before you, and the land became defiled. So let not the land spew you out for defiling it, as it spewed out the nation that came before you. All who do any of those abhorrent things, such persons shall be cut off from their people. You shall keep my charge not to engage in any of the abhorrent practices that were carried on before you, and you shall not defile yourselves through them. I, the Lord, am your God.
Okay. Does any of that make more sense now?
It's also, you think about like procreation and survival. So if you sleep with your daughter, then the genes down the line might have an issue. If if you look at it in the context of that, it's kind of an interesting, in that space, it's very interesting.
Right. When procreation is how you survive.
Right.
Right. That your clan has to be large enough to provide. Right. You have to have people to work the field. You have to have people to tend the flocks. You know, at that point, having a lot of children was one of the ways that you ensured the sons, was how you survived. That's how you survived.
It's also their interpretation of chaos.
So let's look at that. So when we look at 18 and we look at things like, verse 8. Do not uncover the nakedness of your father's wife. It is the nakedness of your father. What does that mean? He owns that. Her. He owns and controls her sexuality. So the violation is not against her. Do not uncover the nakedness of your father's wife, because in so doing, you have disrupted the order of things. He controls that. You as a son are not entitled to that. Because if you were, what would happen then? Because it's not necessarily his mother. They had multiple wives. So someone's father's wife might not be their mother. And if the person who has control of that woman's sexuality, if it's not exclusive, what could happen in a family? Chaos. And if you're a man in your 50s and you marry a 20-year-old, you likely have a 20-year-old son. Right? So somebody's stepmother could be their age. And you're living together.
Not only that, but they used to, I'm reading your book, The Red Pen.
Mm-hmm.
If you think of Leah, who had seven, but they had Bilma and
concubines. Yeah.
And concubines. They had a lot of children.
Yeah.
And the men in those days had a lot of wives and children for so many, but depending if it was a son or not, it became a wife. Otherwise, anybody who labored as a slave, he was allowed to do it, allowed to have sex, but it was not considered, how was the word?
Extramarital?
Yeah.
Correct. So what we're dealing with here, though, is prohibitions on men about violating the sexual property of another man. Because that is how one keeps order. Sexuality is dangerous. It is very dangerous. It is uncontrollable in some ways. So we put major controls on it. Look how much of Torah. You know how terse Torah is. Look how much of Torah is dedicated to who you cannot sleep with as a man. They are off limits, and it tells you why. Whose sexuality that is in terms of what male it belongs to. So it is in that context that we get, and you shall not sleep with animals, right? Because this is what Tikva was pointing to, was because then you start to slide into really scary, right, blurry lines between human and animal, right? So we get controls around eating like animals, and we get controls on sexually behaving like animals. They're the same category for Torah. I want you to hear this. That's the same category. Eating and sex are the same words. Not the same words. God forbid. The same words that are used about them negatively, to'eva, right? Abomination is used for eating. If you eat something that is treif, it's an abomination. Same thing for sex. There is not a weight given to the sex stuff that isn't given to the blood and eating stuff in Torah. We want to pull those apart. So the same folks who want to pull out one line about, and a man shall not lie the lyings of a woman. That's how it's worded, by the way. Now do you hear that differently? A man shall not lie with a man the lyings of a woman. That's what it says in the Hebrew. A man shall not lie the lyings of a woman with another man. Do you hear it differently now? How do you hear it differently? What's different now?
Because if the man
Correct. That's the key. A man shouldn't lie with another man in the role of woman. Being penetrated by a man. That's not man. Because now you're starting to blur the lines again in ways that are really not good. Man is man, and he has sex the way a man has sex. He can't do it with an animal, and he shouldn't put himself in the sexual position of female.
So say that one again.
Thou shalt not lie. I'm going to go to the Hebrew. It's easier. Ve'et zachar lo tishkav. And with a male, you shall not lie, mishkavei isha, the lyings of a woman, toevahi, it is an abomination.
But does that mean that even though you don't lie like a woman, you can penetrate like a man to other men?
So this is a very interesting question. If you're on top as the man with another man, is it a violation of this? So this is a very interesting question. We don't know. We don't know. Right? And how do we know it's not just sexual activity between the same gender? How do we know that? What's missing if that's what it's really about? Women. Doesn't say anything about women.
Except that they're slaves no matter what.
Except their sexuality belongs to other people. But women having sexual encounters with each other don't violate anybody's sexual rights to somebody.
What about men lying with unrelated children that are different?
It's not here. It's not here.
Be okay.
So do you understand that if this were truly a text about morality, that would be here. And actually there's a very disturbing conversation in the Talmud about a 3-year-old that has been penetrated. Are they a virgin or not? Right? And the concern is not with the trauma of the child. The conversation is halachic.
Because it's not in here that you're not allowed to.
It's not in here. So, and I'm not happy about that. I'm not proud about that. I'm just saying what it proves is that you cannot tell me in ancient Israel it would have been acceptable for a man to sleep with a 3-year-old. It would not have been. That's how we know this is not a moral text. This is not concerned with morality. That was not the issue. The issue is how do you prevent categories from bleeding into each other in a way that will upset the entire universe being organized so that it continues. That's what this is concerned about. That's what defines abomination, is when you violate that order. We can't mix linen and wool. You can't mix something made from plants, fabric made from plants, and fabric made from animal. You can't mix them.
But isn't this in some ways, bringing it forward, isn't this the great challenge of our time in that, how much mixing can we accept as a society?
Correct.
And still live?
Correct.
If you think about the whole controversy about immigration, ultimately it comes down to who do we want to be separated from? How much chaos can we absorb when peoples who aren't supposed to be together are all of a sudden together?
Very good, Richard. Which brings us to Maurice Harris. So you're going to go to the page that says we can and must as the top words on your top left-hand corner. Because I cut off the page numbers.
Footnote 26 at the bottom.
Footnote 26 is the first footnote at the bottom of the page. Yeah? Got it? Okay. Starting at the sentence, we can and must. To Richard's point, I swear I didn't pay him. We can and must leave behind the misguided elements of Leviticus that spoke to people living within a narrow, ancient historical moment, while simultaneously lifting out of the text its transcendent core impulse, which is to urge us to conduct even the most private and intimate aspects of our lives with the intention of bringing greater holiness into being. So to Richard's question, so we get it that we're not in the Levitical world anymore, so what? So I know you have a different question, which I'll get to. But I think the impulse is, so what if this still speaks to us? Like what are we to take from this? This whole business that we just read. All religions have been true for their time and their culture and at their level of knowledge of the cosmos. What is important is to take and separate what is temporal from what is universal in that religion. What needs to be discarded is what is temporal and culture bound. Retaining what is universal keeps the spiritual intact and present. Right? He's not going to answer exactly what that is, and he's not going to answer Richard's question about, okay, but where do you stop the mix? How much mixing? If we're going to throw out separation altogether, how much mixing is okay? What isn't okay? At what age is somebody acceptable as a sexual partner if we're going to throw out all separation, right? So, there are things that then we have to figure out, as a society. Did you want to say something?
To amplify on that particular point, it's sort of like, in our current understanding, there's much less of a stigma that's now associated with homosexual relationships, as long as they are committed and caring relationships. There's still, regardless of the genders of the people involved, there's still this kind of cultural, sort of like looking down your nose at just mindless sexual activity just for the sake of having sex. Even though, you'd have to presumably come up with a rationale for saying why that's wrong.
Right. So, but there's less stigma for men with women than there is for the woman involved in those situations. So it's not equal. And I think that's about still the impulse to control women's sexuality.
But that's a political thing and not an ethical thing, my guess.
But I believe most people would judge it as an ethical infraction on the part of a woman who sleeps with lots of men. Absolutely. Not so much men who sleep with many women. And I think that ethical judgment of women's sexuality is still a result of this instinct that women's sexuality should be contained, should be mitigated, should be legislated, should be controlled, because it's dangerous.
Yeah, because men can't control themselves.
Yeah, because I think that in the back of men's heads, they're aware that that's like the most uncontrollable force in the world.
On the street, the guy saying, we're very lucky God gave us 2 heads, but you can only use one at a time.
So there's joking, and there's all kinds of flip stuff about men's indiscriminate sexuality, including, keeping track. And you're cool, right? And in some communities, it's cool how many babies they have with women who are not their wives. Like that's your mark of virility, is you have all these children outside and you're not married. But a woman who does that, who has lots of babies by different men, you can just see how I think there's a difference in terms of women's sexuality is still a very different thing than men's, and nobody cares how many women sleep with, in my experience. Nobody cares. If you're gay, a gay woman, nobody cares how many women you sleep with as a woman.
I feel like
nobody cares. It's women. Who cares?
So much of this that just keeps ringing with me and resonating is fear.
Yeah.
Fear of loss of who you are in some way. Fear of the fact that your impulse, that there's this inner self that's not going to be able to kind of monitor what your inner impulse means.
So every wisdom tradition, every spiritual tradition is right to be afraid of our instincts because they stink a lot of the time. We smoke, we do drugs, we drink too much, we shop too much, we have sex sometimes, with the wrong people, and we're not great. We don't have a great track record for controlling our aggression, our greed, our lust for things and status and control and people. Like we're not saints, and every realistic wisdom tradition knows that. So the question always for me is, we should be afraid Look at our own flippin' war history recently. Are you kidding me? Iraq? For real? What was that? That was revenge. But while we're at it, let's not worry about revenge on the right people, on the people who actually did something. Let's take revenge so that we get to blow something up. But it'll also strategically advance our position to get more of something that we want. Control, access, right? It's sick what we do. It's sickening what we are capable of. And our tradition believes, while we need to be very clear and very aware and very strong in dealing with those parts of ourselves, we have the capacity, when we put controls on them, to live a life of holiness and of godliness. And we are capable of compassion. We are capable of great concern for one another, of self-sacrifice for one another, of service, of genius, of artistic genius, of scientific genius. When we channel greed into discovering the cure for cancer, I'm going to do it. That's okay. Arrogance and greed in that channeled in that way, nothing would happen without it, right? So that there's a generativity to those same instincts and impulses that can tear us down and destroy human society. And our job is to figure out, how do we channel them in our context for the good?
Rabbi, is the Jewish contribution that we are the first to actually define this in that society that existed then? I don't know whether it's true or not, but the Code of Hammurabi also forbids incest, forbids bestiality. Like there are things that are common in every ancient Near Eastern law code. So this is already an awareness in the ancient world. Was the Canaanite tradition similar to this, or did it start to evolve? Where the Greeks obviously were not. I mean, so when did this start to codify and really become announced with the Jewish aspect of this?
Let me answer your other question. I feel clearer about that question, which is, I think the Israelite contribution to the scene is that every act we do has the potential to be either holy or profane. Everything that we do. That is a new idea on the scene. There were laws about controlling your sexuality, but there wasn't an awareness that God cares that I use my sexuality in ways that contribute to me being in right relationship with God and my peers in a way that now it is it's an expression of holiness.
So the Canaanite might have a rule that says you can't sleep with your neighbor's wife, but it's to protect order in the society.
Correct.
It doesn't have a holy aspect.
Correct.
That's the contribution.
Yes. I think that is the contribution, is that everything is potentially holy or profane, and having that constant awareness and legislating a bunch around it too. Don't get me wrong. We're not to be trusted with our own discretion. But that is a huge contribution, that both are true, the Yetzer HaTov, the Yetzer Hara, but they are to be used in the service of the one God. And that God is deeply invested in us behaving in ways that are reflective of the divine image in which we are created. That is new on the scene.
So I have teenagers.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
I have to say, for teens today, their idea of sexuality is very different than the one that I grew up with.
Mm-hmm.
And it's who you love is who you love. Really, truly, that's how they feel about it. They have lots of friends that have different sexual orientations. And also, there's kind of a thing where casual sex is not frowned on the way it was when I was younger. But the thing that is talked about a lot is consent, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of conversations about how do you know that someone really wants to be in an intimate relationship with you. And, like I've said to my son, well, what is consent? Like, how do you, and he says, well, every 5 minutes you have to say, are you okay with this? So, it's interesting how it evolves to, like, what is a holy relationship now for... It's very different from then. There's not as much taboos around sexuality. I mean, I'm not saying everyone is having sex with everyone, but, you know, it's like a different kind of idea. And they're trying to come up with rules that are appropriate for the way their generation sees it. And yeah, that's what it's about, is that there has to be some...
Amy, are you fearing for your daughter? Right here.
You have no idea how much I fear for that child. Yeah, I'm buying a shotgun right after her bat mitzvah. You want to come into my house and see my daughter? No problem. And it's it is one of the core issues of our time that, you know, it's kind of what Richard was pointing to, that if all of the traditional understandings of what's right and wrong and respectful or not respectful, holy or not, when all of those fall away, what's left? And the quicker it changes,
it's hard to catch up.
It's hard to put things back in place, you know, but my bet is for whatever's swinging this way, you know, there will be a gentle swing back. I worry about who gets caught in the, it being to one extreme or the other. That's what I worry about for my daughter more than anything is, you know, thinking this is okay and truly believing it's okay and then regretting deeply, you know, that interaction. That scares me more than anything else. Look, if she's happy, oh God, okay, I'm not putting this out there into the world. It's not her sexuality and her sexual engagement that scares me. It is this issue of consent. That at what point are you able really to consent? Right? She wanted to get her ears pierced. And I said, you're too young to make that decision. And she's like, but I know that I want pierced ears. Why am I too young? And I said, you're old enough to know you want pierced ears. I believe you 100%, and I don't believe that's going to change. But you've never experienced pain like that enough to know that you're ready to experience that kind of pain. Oh, look at them shaking their heads over there. So it's not even the point. Not even the point. My point was, what was my point? My point. All right. Out of control. Consent, right? So at what point can I consent to something that I haven't ever experienced enough to know whether or not I'm really ready for it?
I don't have pierced ears yet. Am I old enough?
Now you could. I can think I know I want that, but I've never been through it.
Right.
So I'm worried about decisions that are big enough in our time that we don't have the experience to make. And I'm not sure the answer to that question, right? At one point she said, all right, now I'm ready. However painful it is, enough people have gone through it, and I'm really ready, and I can handle the pain. And I said, okay, then we'll do it. But I don't know what that is for sexuality. I don't know what that is for consent to what that means for a girl. I know for boys too, it's a big issue in terms of their intimacy, sure, and their self-image and all the things that happen. For girls, there's still this level. When do they know that they're ready for that? I truly, honestly, and I'm very sex positive. I'm extremely feminist and sex positive, and I still really worry about how do you know if you've never done it, the impact that it's going to have. And
just say you can't have sex till you're married.
I think 32 is a perfectly wonderful compromise between what I want and what she wants. 32 is a good target.
I remember myself as a youngster when I first had sex. The idea for me is, and then when I said my daughter, I said, you'll be old enough when you can handle the consequences.
That's right. Right.
And that's what I said to her. But at the same time, I remember as a child, as a teenager, I used to think, they make so much emphasis on it.
Right.
And it makes the whole thing, love is attached to this, but it,
it's chaotic for them.
It is very, very
and in that sense, Leviticus is completely relevant. So let's look at the page that says being pro-gay and hanging in there with Leviticus. I just love the name of that chapter. That's just a great name for a chapter. And go down to the third paragraph. In discussing this very question, The contemporary Jewish and feminist theologian Judith Plaskow proposes that our ideal be the unification of sexuality and spirituality, which is made possible through, quote, the exercise of respect, responsibility, and honesty commensurate with the nature and depth of the particular relationship as basic values in any sexual connection. So she gives us a starting place. Plaskow's ready to put herself out there and give us a starting place. Right? That she says to Richard's question, this is it. To Linda's question, this is it. The exercise of respect, responsibility, and honesty commensurate with the nature and depth of the particular relationship, that those should be basic values in any sexual connection. So she's saying they're not the same across the board. It might be a casual one-night stand, right? Then that has different parameters on it than, a committed, intimate relationship would have in terms of what respect and other things and honesty look like in the context of that relationship. Okay, go to your last page.
The one with 30.
Oh God, now I don't know. The one with a big blank space at the end.
30, footnote 32.
So the second paragraph of small letters, small writing. In other words, I'm not even sure. I think this is Rabbis Sandy and Dennis Sasso, a married couple. In other words, we must learn to look at the overarching divine principles of love and justice and learn to, they're talking about this whole business of using sacred texts, right? How we use these texts. To use sacred texts that teach the values of equality, human dignity, and fairness to critique those texts that do not. So how are they saying we should pick from Leviticus what we keep and what we toss? Let's read it again. We must learn to look at the overarching divine principles of love and justice. Those are universal and timeless, they're arguing. And learn to use sacred texts that teach the values of equality, human dignity, and fairness to critique those texts that do not. So we point to the text that male and female, God created them both in God's image, and we should read every other text through the lens of that. Right? Fairness, equality, right? Because those are our values. They are in our Torah. Some of this stuff is a temporal understanding of how one brings holiness into sexual relationships or eating. We need to use these overarching values, and I completely agree with this as a Reconstructionist, to critique every other text. And if the text no longer stands up to these criteria, then they're temporal, and they don't speak to us anymore as binding in any way, in terms of looking at things ethically and morally and spiritually. Yeah? We have to decide what those texts are, right? They just give us the kind of broad category, but we have to figure out what those texts are and aren't.
But in addition to deciding which texts are or aren't, don't we also have to recognize that what constitutes equality, human dignity, and fairness are not always absolute contents. What is justice?
Yes.
There's justice in the divine sense that, that God always seeks justice. But how we define justice is something that is also, it's not an absolute.
Correct.
Right? And so, like, when people talk about social justice now, and, justice is justice, and unfair applications of justice, and all that sort of stuff, even if we use
the broad
transcendent categories like that, even that is somewhat temporal in nature.
So that is what I would call job security. Right? So that means we're going to pick the texts that we think are texts about justice, because we still believe that justice is a relevant, transcendent concept for us as Jews that is compelling, right? That is binding on my life somehow, and expressive of holiness. Now we have to sit in Torah study and debate and figure out, looking at those texts, looking at new texts, looking at, other writers, what does that mean?
Right.
and what laws flow from that. We could be together in this room and have a complete and wow, unbelievable understanding of something and go out and vote for two different people. Based on that understanding, well, I don't know now that we could say that in this election anymore. But right, that ultimately we could come down on two sides of a debate about what should happen in society, a law or anything else. But we've had the conversation and all leave feeling a commitment to justice. And then I understand what that means for me when we're talking about the death penalty. You may have a completely different understanding, but we have to stay in dialogue about it, not just together on opposing sides, says our tradition, but over time, we have to allow our circumstances and what we've learned and who's thinking and writing and teaching these days, or what the circumstances are these days, to inform a changing attitude towards that. You know, like what if we have cameras and complete DNA, whatever, so that we know people are guilty, of something. We have it on film. Would we feel differently about the death penalty? I'm just saying we have to allow our decisions, however morally clear we are at one moment or unclear, to change with what we're exposed to.
When she talked about her teenager, and I think of like the undeveloped brain because they go to someplace else. Able to follow these kinds of things that we talked about, like at the higher self, because that's where they are. And we talk about us as human beings developing from a baby to wisdom, hopefully, and finding our own self versus the collective we that might go out of control. Like if you keep digging at a deeper level, like talking about love as a base or whatever those kinds of things, it always seems to feel, I don't know, at least to me, like the right way to be in this world. Does that make sense?
Yes, I missed part of the point. I'm not sure which part I missed.
I think the teenage, you try to think of yourself as a teenager maybe instead of your children as teenagers. And how you felt was that you were striving and struggling and you understood concepts of love and respect, and maybe those change as you get older. But that's part of the journey of becoming more mature, is wrestling with those and sometimes making mistakes, but always feeling like at least you've got a handle on some of those ideas. Teenagers are not like, zombies walking around waiting for the brain to form. They're really wrestling with all that stuff.
When I was a teenager, though, it was shameful to do some of the things that teenagers do. So there was a boundary.
Your mother would say the same about you when you were a teenager.
Right. But
right. So
this is what I'm saying.
But
I feel like for them, they're developing an understanding of how to deal with this. It's harder. More. Yeah. Everybody says that about their next.
And everybody's right.
Well, it is getting harder because it's changing faster. And everything's more public. Everything goes on Facebook. Well, for them it's not Facebook, it's Snapchat or Insta, whatever these days. So, but my point is, I don't ever want to say in any way that I at all underestimate how much teenagers have going on and how thoughtful they are, and that they do have concepts in place that we hopefully have given them and taught them by putting them in this loving, amazing society and school system. Like, I'm not suggesting that. I don't ever want to write off young people. Ever. My only concern, and I'll say it again because I still feel it, is that there are things that they cannot know the impact of until after they've done it and they regret it. Forever. Herpes is forever. I'm serious about this. There are things they can't know when they can handle the consequences. They think they know. And it's one time. And he's a good guy. So I'm not going to catch anything. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about I totally get it that they are wrestling. I believe they are amazing young people who are doing amazing things. My concern is their frontal lobes have not caught up with the things they have access to. And they're making decisions, including smoking marijuana, and I've heard it twice this week in my office about teenagers. So they're smoking dope, thinking they've got control of it, while that marijuana is changing their frontal lobes and the development of the hardware of their brains. Okay, so now they know the consequences? They're gonna use an impaired brain to make choices about their brain development. Like I
told him that his frontal lobe won't be developed until he's about 22 to 24.
That's exactly right. So anyway, my point being, it's just worrisome that they have so much access to things and so little yet experience or capacity to sit with some.
About all of those rules that they laid down, all of those.
And they weren't wrong. That's my point. They weren't wrong to be concerned that our inclinations will pull us in ways that are not good for us. Do I want to go back to this? Certainly not. Do I think we should be free for all, do what you want, it's fine? It's an experience of the 60s? No. Right? So, it's all about the muddy middle. All right, we're going to close with this quote by the Sassos. By Maurice Harris. To the Sassos' understanding of the Bible's deepest witness, I'd like to add one of the central values of Leviticus, to strive to bring holiness to every dimension of our life. It's up to us to figure out what it means to do that, using all the tools and the best information about the human condition that we have. Those tools include the Bible and centuries of its interpretation, our ability to think independently and reassess received beliefs when they appear to be causing harm, and our capacity to open our eyes to the beauty and goodness in the people and the relationships taking place right in front of us. Good Shabbos.
You've been listening to Rabbi Amy Bernstein's Friday morning Torah study from Kehillat Israel in Pacific Palisades, California. For more information, go to our website, www.ourki.org.